Today, I want to talk about one of the most unique players in all of college football, and that is a quarterback by the name of Zach Calzada. He has now played at 4 different college football programs, 3 of which are in the SEC, and he has a confusing legacy. Yes, he ended up beating Alabama back in 2021 and became an Aggie hero for that, but he also was a bust at Auburn, was never all that great at A&M, and now took a huge paycheck from Kentucky only to score 1 touchdown. But to play devil's advocate, he was a superstar at Incarnate, and it looked like things were all going to finally fall into place for him. He has a super interesting backstory as well, but recently he was in the news for the wrong reasons as he was flexing a bunch of money in a video, as after I said, he's only had 1 touchdown this year. In today's video, we're to talk about the $1 million quarterback mistake that Kentucky made and go through the rise and fall of Zach Calzada. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's go ahead and get started and talk about Zach Calzada. Okay, so in order to understand how we got to this point, we actually need to go back to Cuba. His grandparents, Hector and Maria Calzada, ended up fleeing Cuba during Fidel Castro's regime, and while they were unable to arrange a direct route to the US, they left for Panama, saying they were going on a delayed honeymoon. The Calzadas were able to obtain passage to the US just a couple months later and settled in St. Louis, Missouri. His grandfather said, quote, "I had nothing. They took it all away, and they didn't let me take anything. They took all the money in my bank account when I said I was leaving, and it was very difficult." Hector Jr. became a swimmer at Tulane, while the dad worked multiple jobs to get him through college. Basically, this was the foundation for Zach Calzada's never quit attitude. He ended up growing up in Sugar Hill, Georgia, and would eventually become a big-time football player at the quarterback position. He got his first start as a junior with the Longhorns, and the team went 6-5 and lost in the first round. He ended up having about 1,700 yards and 15 touchdowns, and as a result, Calzada went unnoticed. That was until Lehigh offered him a scholarship in early 2018. At the time, he had 0 recruiting stars, as he said, quote, "I was 5'10", but then I got to 6'2", and suddenly it all made sense. Compared to the top quarterback prospects, he became good relatively recently. Quarterbacks no longer had to be 6'5", but 5'10" at the time was still short. It's why many hadn't heard of Calzada. That late growth spurt also was paired alongside arm strength, and schools began to take notice of him. In 1 week, he picked up offers from NC State and Northwestern, and he said, quote, "NC State offensive coordinator Elijah Drinkwitz saw me throw, and he offered. I have a good relationship with him, and NC State was a game changer as they were my first Power 5 offer." He said as soon as he found a place, he would take it because quarterback spots go quickly, but he improved off of his 2017 season, throwing for 1,700 yards his next year. At one point, scouts said the 2019 class seemed to be lackluster, but in 2018, he announced he had received an offer from Georgia. On April 30th, Calzada earned offers from Pitt, Northwestern, West Virginia, Mizzou, Vandy, North Carolina, Maryland, and Texas A&M. He'd also been invited to the Elite 11, and Calzada was no longer a sleeper prospect in the 2019 class. Eventually, he chose Texas A&M over the Georgia Bulldogs just 6 days after his unofficial visit to College Station. He decided to pull the trigger after a surprise visit, and nicknamed the Cuban Missile. He had thrown for 3,400 yards and 29 touchdowns, while also rushing for 500 yards and 11 touchdowns during his high school career. He was pretty good. As I said, he chose A&M, and according to 24/7 Sports, Calzada was a 3-star recruit, the number 19 pro-style quarterback, and the 476th best player in the class of 2019. So, how would he end up doing at A&M? Well, let's take a look. So when Calzada arrived at Texas A&M in 2019, he'd end up getting a chance to appear in just a couple of games, as he was one of the backups behind Kellen Mond, and he threw for 133 yards and 2 touchdowns with an interception. Those 2 touchdowns came against Lamar. After being out for the 2020 season, he would become the backup in 2021 to Haynes King. But in week 2, Haynes King would have a season-ending injury against Colorado, and all of a sudden, Calzada would have to play. In total, he ended up throwing for about 2,200 yards and 17 touchdowns, while he also had 9 interceptions. Calzada never had many great performances, but he had one that was extremely memorable. And of course, it came against number 1 Alabama. In what was potentially the game of the year, A&M won 41-38 over the number 1 Crimson Tide, and Calzada threw for 285 yards and 3 touchdowns. What's absolutely ridiculous is his 285 yards was the best of his entire career, both high school and college, and the Aggies desperately needed it. Somehow, he was a guy who could actually beat Nick Saban at Alabama, and after that performance, he was named the SEC Offensive Player of the Week, and it should have been the start of something, but instead it wasn't. He did have 2 touchdowns against both Mizzou and South Carolina, but to finish the year, he struggled against Auburn and Ole Miss. His final game against LSU, he would throw 3 touchdowns, and in total, he threw for 2,200 yards and 17 touchdowns. Going into the 2022 season, he would elect to transfer instead of staying home, as they now had Max Johnson and Connor Weigman. He would now be brought in alongside Oregon transfer Robbie Ashford, 4-star freshman Holden Gariner, and then players like TJ Finley and Demetrius Davis were also on the roster. There was now a huge competition to replace Bo Nix as the starting quarterback, and many thought Calzada could be the preseason favorite to win the job, as he had the most experience, but to say his Auburn tenure was uneventful might be selling it short. He never played a single game for the Tigers in one season, and that was because of a shoulder injury that required surgery, and he never saw the field. Both Finley and Ashford ended up getting playing time, and then Calzada got a medical redshirt for the season. After the season was over, Brian Harsin was fired, and Hugh Freeze didn't have plans for Calzada, so he entered the transfer portal and found a landing spot with Incarnate Word. Incarnate Word had just produced Cam Ward a couple of years ago, so maybe Calzada could be the next guy in line. That is exactly what would end up happening, as he was incredible in 2023 for them. He ended up throwing for 2,600 yards and 19 touchdowns, while also rushing for 5 more scores on the ground. This also came in just 8 games for Incarnate Word, and in 2024, he was even better. This time he threw for 3,744 yards, 35 touchdowns, and only 9 picks. He continued to do well on the ground, also having 5 rushing scores, and there were multiple games where he had over 300 yards passing. He had 5 touchdowns against Lamar and Nichols, and Calzada was really good. Granted, this was all at the FCS level, but because of a redshirt year, a medical waiver, and the bonus 2020 season, somehow, someway, his college career was not going to be over. He ended up becoming the Southland Conference Player of the Year, as he was number 5 in the FCS in passing yards, number 2 in the FCS in touchdowns, and in 2 years, he had over 6,000 passing yards and 64 touchdowns. Ultimately, he'd enter the 2025 transfer portal and got a couple of offers, but Kentucky paid $1.25 million to get Zach Calzada on their roster. Instead of getting a decent starting quarterback, they got a viral money flex video instead. Unfortunately, this is a trend for Kentucky though, as after Will Levis left for the NFL, the coaching staff has gone 0-3 in the transfer portal, despite having high expectations for Devin Leary, Brock Vandegrift, and Gavin Wimsatt. They'd now be trying to strike gold on their 4th transfer quarterback, and that was going to be Zach Calzada. He said he always felt doubted throughout his career, and that he was ready to prove people wrong in the SEC. He said, quote, "I've been itching to get back since I left. It's been a long road. There are definitely times where I was wondering if I'd ever get back to play at a high level, but it's always been the goal." 24/7 Sports ranked all the projected starting quarterbacks in the SEC, and they all had Calzada dead last. He ended up entering the season as the projected starter, but apparently, redshirt freshman Cutter Boley made it a competition in fall camp. Despite Cutter gaining a ton of ground, it was announced by Pete Thamel that Calzada was going to get the start against Toledo. Some fans wanted to see Boley get the nod because he was younger, was more highly ranked, and had a lot more potential, but the staff decided to go with Calzada instead of the local kid. Ultimately, his first game in 2025 was not all that great, as he went 10 of 23 for 85 yards, without a touchdown and 1 interception. He did end up with a rushing score, and Kentucky beat the Rockets 24-16. In Game 2 against number 20 Ole Miss, Calzada had gone 15 of 30 for 149 yards, without a touchdown or an interception, and that was it. He ended up leaving in the 4th quarter because of a shoulder injury, and that was all Kentucky got out of Zach Calzada. I'm not sure if the injury was that bad, or if they have just decided to go with Cutter Boley because it makes a lot more sense. The Wildcats paid over $1 million for 1 total touchdown and 1 win against a MAC school. Unfortunately, Calzada went viral for different reasons instead of being on the field, as there was a video that was leaked of him flexing $100 bills and telling someone to go get you some money. Allegedly, the person that this video was sent to admitted he told Calzada he sucked at football. He, quote, sucked at football, which prompted the response. This ended up going viral, and Zach apologized for it, and it just was not a great look. For a guy who had 1 touchdown and never had much success at either A&M or Auburn, it just wasn't a great look. Kentucky has mismanaged its quarterback room for years now, as all the guys they took out of high school were bust, and most of their transfers have been terrible except Will Levis. As I said, Kentucky paid $1.25 million, and here's what they got. 234 passing yards, a 47% completion percentage, 1 interception, and 1 rushing score. To me, this is definitely one of the most insane stories of the year, but to be fair, I do feel a little bit bad for Calzada. I thought he got the short end of the stick at A&M a little bit. He never got his opportunity at Auburn, and I was hoping he'd be decent at Kentucky. He admittedly was pretty good at Incarnate Word, but the Southland Conference is much different than the SEC. I truly have no clue what has actually happened with the injury, so if you're a Kentucky fan, let me know what has actually happened. But overall, this is just a weird story and a sad fall from grace. I hope the best for Zach moving forwards though, as I'm sure he'll go into coaching or play at some low level of football, but who knows? What do you guys think? If you're a Kentucky fan, what went wrong for Zach Calzada? Why has the quarterback situation been butchered? And what player or topic should I cover next? Be sure to let me know down below, leave a like if you need to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out one of the videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.